What's up troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and today we're going to be discussing the Battlefield 2018 campaign. Now, there's still a lot to be learnt about Battlefield 2018, the setting, what the game's going to be like, and more importantly how things are going to unfold across the next year or so as we hear announcements and of course finally see some initial gameplay. But one big question that seems to come up every year about every single Battlefield title is how the campaign is going to function. Now, today I'm going to dive into some key points about what I feel as though the campaign should be like, because I feel like we do a lot of discussing about what the campaign lacks, rather than talking about what the campaign in fact should be. I think it's worth mentioning initially that most campaigns Battlefield has produced so far haven't really been all that awe-inspiring. I'd say the last good campaigns have come from the Battlefield Bad Company series, especially the first and the second, where character development and just the general badass story was very memorable. I think a lot of us can remember some of the key lines from Bad Company 2 and shit, and it was just a very good story. You know, you got invested in it, you had characters that you were interested in, and it showcased some of the best potential of Battlefield in terms of destruction and just all-out chaos, which is something I think a lot of us appreciated. Flash forward to more modern Battlefields, and I think it's safe to say while some of them have had their moments, you know, Battlefield 3's campaign did have some pretty intense, gripping moments like the opening earthquake scene, and Battlefield 4 of course did have its own moments too, it's all been rather hit and miss. Suddenly things changed in Battlefield 1 when they attempted war stories, and I really don't think this was the right direction to head in. Whilst I'm aware lots of people really enjoyed war stories and preferred it to what had come beforehand, I feel as though the lack of being able to attach yourself to characters and kind of repeating more or less the same things in lots of different environments isn't what a campaign should be about. And I think the best war story that was there was Friends in High Places, because you had two relatively interesting characters, they had a bit of an attachment going, and, you know, even though it was a flying mission, the mechanics were very interesting, and things felt really cool and intense, and you actually moderately gave a shit about what was going on. Now, unfortunately, because it was a war story, everything was cut kind of short, and you felt as though there probably could have been a bit more development of what was happening and, you know, more interest into what was happening around all the players and everything that was going on. But unfortunately, in the manner of which war stories takes place, which is lots of really small short stories, that just doesn't happen. So, today I want to talk about what the campaign should be, and I'm going to be drawing examples from other EA games to illustrate just how simplistic it really should be to build a much better campaign for Battlefield. The first one for me is that we actually need characters that we can invest ourselves in and find more interesting. And I think a lot of us can name single-player games or single-player aspects of games where we remember characters. You know, I remember being absolutely devastated when Soap was killed in Modern Warfare. You know, I can remember most of what happened in The Last of Us, and that's just a testament to how good some of the campaigns are. And there's no shame in admitting that Call of Duty naturally has some of the better campaigns out there for a first-person shooter. But even games like Titanfall 2, where you had this really interesting character development between the Titan and the pilot, stuff like that was actually pretty badass, and although I felt as though it wasn't as strong as it could have been, it was definitely something I found myself much more invested in than I initially anticipated. I never thought I could find a 10-foot something majig, you know, mech machine interesting as a character, but suddenly here I was, sad that the mech machine was getting its arm torn off. I was like, no, you can't do that to my Titan, that's not cool. And we just don't have any of that in Battlefield since the Bad Company days, and I think the biggest problem with this is to do with the stories themselves and how they're written, because there isn't an instance where a character has the opportunity to make a huge shift in development. There isn't a moment where you look at a character in one mission and then suddenly in the next mission, you know, it's almost like looking at a different person or an upgraded person, because we're just not that invested in their stories, you know. I felt like there was a lot of space in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 where we actually could have learned about some of our teammates a bit more in you know, intense moments where maybe somebody's bleeding out or somebody's having this huge moral dilemma or whatever. Just having situations that define characters more vividly and give you a better picture of what they're like gets you more involved in the characters themselves and gives you reasons to hate them or care about them. And the story writing so far hasn't really facilitated that to allow us to have these characters that we look at in multiple different ways. You know, you only need to look at Joel and Ellie from The Last of Us at certain parts of the story to realize that every time you look at them, they're almost different in one respect or another. You've learned something new about them along the way at every step and corner that makes you go, holy shit, you know, this is the person I like or don't like, or this is something that's really crazy about them, or something different. And I'm not saying that Battlefield should be striving for, you know, something like The Last of Us, because if they manage to pull that off, you know, that's mind-blowingly good. But even just small, subtle improvements. When you're in the scene of war and you've got things like explosions popping off everywhere and people being shot at, and, you know, huge moral dilemmas that can unfold from warfare, there really should be lots more maneuverability for character development. The next big step for me about improving Battlefield as a campaign is to have more visceral moments. Now, this kind of ties into my previous thing about character development, but I feel as though in most Battlefield campaigns, we lack a lot of moments that could be awe-inspiring, or could be, like, you know, mind-blowing. Now, jumping to games like Titanfall 2, there are some moments in there where the scenery or what's happening in front of you, like Titans jumping between spaceships, is just, you know, absolutely mind-blowingly fucking crazy. Not only because it looks incredible, but, you know, just the very nature of what's unfolding in front of you just makes you lose your shit. You're just like, holy shit, you know, this is happening and it's cool. And I feel as though Battlefield lacks a lot of that, which is a huge shame, because not only does it have interesting settings, but it also has some of the best graphical looks in most modern shooters. I'm pretty sure the next Battlefield in 2018 will probably be the best looking game to release, full stop. It'll look better than Star Wars Battlefront 2, which is, you know, in its own right, an absolutely stunning game. And there are some instances in Star Wars Battlefront 2 when, you know, you're seeing Star Destroyers blow up in the sky, or you're seeing, you know, some of these incredible sceneries that are set up in front of you, where those moments do occur. And one of the things I remember specifically about the story as well is, you know, I was a little droid watching shit unfold in vents below me, and that was so cool, because it was this, you know, hugely interesting moment where, you know, something that was entirely unique to the Star Wars universe could happen. A little droid spying on some stormtroopers talking about stuff, and a little droid spying on some rebels talking about things. It's really cool and really interesting. Now, flash forward to something like Battlefield, why isn't there a moment where we have like a sniper rifle set up in, you know, a tower or something that's having these interesting moments, these visceral scenes, witnessing incredible scenery, witnessing character development unfold in front of them, and things like that? It's something that could happen, it's something that could be improved on, and one of the scenes that strikes me the most from Battlefield 4 is you're heading out in one of the initial missions. It's in the trailer, it features quite heavily as well. There's like this open vista of land in front of you, and then eventually that unfolds with the helicopter crashing and the turbine spinning into the ground, and that featured quite a lot in the campaign trailer because it was a really interesting visceral moment. But there aren't enough of them, and there's not enough of them that are very awe-inspiring. I need memorable moments, and one of the things that actually really kind of stands out in this factor for me is the scene in Battlefield 3 where one of the soldiers, as you're running out onto the road, gets shot in the chest and is dragged away by a teammate. Like, that was fucking cool, not only because it was like sad and, you know, made you realize the nature of the situation you were in, but it was just such an awe-inspiring moment with the game where things open up and it was very intense, and it built a really good atmosphere for the rest of that mission to unfold in. And I feel as though moments like that need to be the cornerstones to everything that we do in the future campaign. The final thing for me is that Battlefield needs to start showing off the things that make it special. Something Titanfall 2's campaign did really well is that it took the mechanics of the game and made them central to each individual mission. And there's a very key balance that has to be made here. There are games that have interesting mechanics, and then there are games that focus on them too extensively, and then there are games that don't focus on them enough. In the past, Battlefield games haven't focused on the mechanics enough. There's not a lot of interesting things going on. You occasionally have a tank mission or a plane mission eventually that makes it somewhat more spicy and somewhat more interesting, but ultimately, there isn't, you know, any few moments where you feel as though the core elements of Battlefield, which is destruction and multi-combat gameplay, is being truly utilized at a good level. At the same time, there is also instances where mechanics are being overly used and too excessive, and this started happening in some of the Call of Duty titles, such as Call of Duty Ghosts, where you have like robot snipers and fucking drones and shit, and that ultimately leads towards a weak narrative. If you have a game that's built entirely on set pieces, entirely on, you know, these moments that are set up for you and unfold in certain ways, like, ooh, look, you're going to shoot this guy this way with this sniper rifle, or blow up this drone in this way with this gun, that's too scripted, and it kind of ruins the dynamic of gameplay around you, and it also ruins the fact that, you know, there clearly isn't a story, because you're fixating on these little interesting mechanics so much to kind of phase out the fact that there's not really a strong narrative going on. And the best striking balance, and I think this was achieved really well in Titanfall 2, is a really good narrative that also ties in with lots of cool mechanics that feature in the game. There was a mission in Titanfall 2 where you sort of jumped off of some walls on this, alien planet to go and find fuel cells and things to help your Titan out. And it was really interesting because you got to use the jump mechanics to jump in between the walls and wall run and stuff. But there was a really interesting narrative because, you felt that your Titan was kind of fucked up and destroyed and you needed to help him. And that developed throughout the entire game. There were instances where using the Titan was central to a really intense narrative. One of the final missions has you assaulting a base where it's almost Titan v Titan gameplay, and it's very intense, but you feel as though the mechanics of your Titan tie into the intensity, and the full scope of the battle is unfolding in front of you because you have to utilize all of these Titan-based abilities with the understanding of how important what it is you're doing is changing the tide of this war in this campaign. And moments like that are very well thought out and very well balanced really do need to exist in Battlefield. Battlefield prides itself on having tanks, aircraft, boats, everything. It also prides itself on having this incredible level of destruction. And I feel as though there seems to be not enough of that kind of utilization in most Battlefield campaigns. I think a really cool mission, in fact, was one mission in Battlefield 3 where you played as a fighter plane, or like a jet or something, and later on in the missions you actually hit targets, like laser designated targets with a drone, or like some kind of missile attachment to the actual jet itself. I can't remember the exact details of it, but it sticks in my mind because it was such a breakaway from the traditional combat of the rest of the campaign, where you were just running around senselessly in a first-person perspective with a gun. And having breakaways like that, I feel as though it was something that was attempted in war stories. One minute you were flying, the next minute you were in a tank mission, the next minute you were in a stealth mission. And that's great and all, but that needs to be centralized under one single campaign with the same set of players. And the problem with war stories that I had was because there was such a lack of dialogue and such a lack of actual story with each individual war story, as almost ironic as it is that because it fixated on those individual mechanics so much, it was just like, great, I'm in this stealth mission. Why the hell am I even going stealthy if there's no real incentive? Like, one of the missions for the tank mission as well, like, you have this scene where you had to sneak through, German tanks, like German patrols, and grab some gear and stuff, and it was just like, why would I bother assassinating all of these Germans in a foggy forest when I can just open up on them with a machine gun, which is what most people eventually did. There was no incentive to use the mechanic. There was no story as to why I should be stealthy. There was no reason as to why I couldn't, kill them 1,000 other different ways. And I think the biggest way to look at this is to be more like Titanfall 2 and be less like Far Cry. Because after Far Cry 3 and Blood Dragon, this really weird thing started happening with the Ubisoft's version of that game. They fixated so much on having, this big open world map that you could complete missions in any way that you wanted, because we're giving the player choice and freedom and all that bullshit. All that kind of, like, stuff that they can throw into advertising whenever they fancy. But what fell away from Far Cry after 3 and after Far Cry Blood Dragon was this sheer lack of narrative. What made the mechanics interesting in Far Cry 3, like taking out outposts however you fancied and completing side missions, was because there was such a strong central core narrative to the game and such a really investing story that all of those mechanics and how they were utilized was just like, holy shit, this is great. When you take out a compound, you felt like you were really doing some damage. You felt like you were actually fucking over the bad guy. Whereas now, when you sort of play Far Cry in general, when you take out a tower or an outpost, it's just like, well, I don't really give a shit. In Far Cry 4, I could have taken out like 4 different outposts, and I didn't feel like I was making a difference. I didn't feel like I had incentive to do so. I didn't really care about the story and nature of the warfare in front of me. Whereas, in Far Cry 3, there was that precedent, there was that set. So striking that cool balance between having, a really strong narrative that is backed up and supported by use of really interesting gameplay dynamics is the best way to do things, but fixating on one or the other too extensively is where things go wrong. So more like Far Cry 3 and more like Titanfall 2 and less like the other Far Cries and less like Call of Duty Ghosts, I think is the best way to look at it. So guys, that's it for me today. I hope you found this video interesting as to what I feel as though the campaign should be like in Battlefield 2018. Interestingly enough, I did a poll about whether or not Battlefield 2018 should even have a campaign, and most people actually said yes. It was like 80% to 20 over 1,000 votes, which, blew my mind because traditionally I didn't think that'd be the case. But let me know what you think down in the comment section below. As always, it's been me, the Tactical Brit, and thank you for watching.